Good evening, everyone. Turn this up a little bit. All right, let's get this thing started here pretty quick. All right, for those of you who haven't been here before, you're going to be able to hear a lot better on this side of that wooden post. There's some more chairs over here. There's some seats here on the couch. If you want to sit in the front row like the best students do. So no, just you? That's it? Okay. All right, well, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Mark Melton. I'm a local attorney. I own the bar here, so I'm happy to have you guys here this evening so we can finish our 4-part series on The Accommodation by Jim Schutze. In case you didn't see, we have the honor of having Jim here tonight. Right there in the middle. Thank you, Jim. And I'm sure most of you guys would prefer to hear from him anyway, so I'm going to do my usual dog and pony show. The format is I stand up here and give a brief lecture on the contents of the 50 pages that we're going over tonight, which is the last quarter of the book. And then usually we open that up to Q&A so that you guys can make commentary and ask questions, and I do my best to answer them, and when I fail, inevitably we point to someone else in the crowd who can answer the questions. Fortunately tonight, we have Jim here, so he can tell us exactly what he meant. We don't need to speculate on a lot of these things. We also have the honor of having one of the topics of discussion tonight in the room. Reverend Peter Johnson is here. So I'll talk a little bit about him this evening. I don't want to steal all of his thunder, but we'll hopefully get him up here for a minute too to share a few words at the end as well. So as I've said before, the whole purpose of this thing is to get everyone in a room so that we can share some of the stories of our history that we and our ancestors have shared collectively. For those of us that are in the younger crowd, we're reading about a lot of this for the first time. But as we've seen the last 3 weeks, the parallels to the present are there. We're going to see that again tonight. For as much of things have changed, they haven't really changed that much at all in a lot of respects. So tonight we're going to go through chapter 27 through the end of the book. Jim, you can just scream out when I screw anything up. Feel free. But chapter 27 starts in 1964, where we have the Dallas Crime Commission announced that protesters, people associated with the civil rights movement, is what they meant, would be treated as common criminals. We began a program of stop and frisk. Does this sound familiar to anyone? Right? These are still conversations that we're having today. As we've seen, there was a whole lot of this notion of the accommodation throughout the city of Dallas, where the black leadership, or at least parts of it in Dallas, were talked into maintaining the peace. I can't remember who said it now, but a lot of these people look to order over justice, which was a lot of the problem that we're going to talk about this evening. The theme in these last chapters of the book is about how Dallas really never had its moment in the sun with any kind of major race riots or anything like that, and what the impacts of that lack of a major riot or protest really had on the psyche of the city. Dr. Ernest Estelle, who was part of the Interdenominational Ministerial Alliance, now called the Dallas Community Committee, or maybe it's changed its name, this is 30 years old, asked the black community to end picketing and sit-ins because he thought the promotion of civil rights were no longer necessary in 1964, which seems silly in retrospect, but that's what he said. And the black community at large listened, and the level of confrontation slackened. A year later was the Watts riot in LA. The comment that Linda takes all my notes on this, by the way, so let's give Linda a hand real quick. She puts a lot of hard work into this, and I really appreciate it. I give the book a read, and then she tells me what I'm supposed to say out of it, so it's good. But the quote that she pulled out here was, where the police saw black criminals tearing apart law and order with a cascade of Molotov cocktails, the Negroes of Watts watched freedom fighters liberating themselves with blood and fire. And this reminds me a lot of the recent riots that we've seen even before this Confederate monument issue had come up. A couple years ago, I wrote an article in the morning news, or a column rather, on the Baltimore race riots. And one of the comments that I made in there was, if you look throughout history, there's always this issue that arises where the top 1% of the society doesn't look out for the rest of the society. And when that happens, and these people are in control, and they don't take care of the other 99%, there is always inevitably revolution. We saw it in the American Revolution, we saw it in Russia with the Bolsheviks, we saw it in France several times, and the outcome is never good, but somehow we continue to not learn from this history. And in my view, a lot of these riots that we see over racial lines are really mini revolutions. These are people that have been oppressed all of their lives, through generations, and they finally put the foot down and said, I just can't take it anymore, I've had enough. Now, I don't think that you have to necessarily say looting and violence is good in order to understand the context from which they're coming and the actions that they're taking to try and just get simple equality. In chapter 28, we move on to 1968 with middle-class black homeowners in the Seeing Hills neighborhood, which is over near south of Oak Cliff. And they were upset that the city was putting in a whole lot of low-income housing projects, and so they went to then Mayor Eric Johnson to complain. And I think, like a lot of city leaders even today, when the complainers come, the door closes and the phone gets taken off the hook, and no one really wants to listen to the complaints. And that certainly was a problem then, and it probably still is a problem now to a large degree. Johnson didn't like to be pushed around by the black people that were coming into his office making demands, and so he largely ignored them. And one of the stories that we come to as a result of that I really like, but I'll save it for a second. One of the comments that Jim made in this was that part of the reason for this was because white people never feared black people, because they had always had this issue under control. And this was one of the arguments for why this failure to have any kind of mass riot or uprising from the black community may have stifled the growth of the freedom and opportunities in that community. Mr. Reverend Johnson over here, at least in 1969, came to Dallas as a civil rights leader. I think if you study up on any of his history, it's pretty amazing some of the things that he was able to do. His observation in the late 60s was that he felt like South Dallas was a place that the civil rights era had forgotten. You can tell us if this quote is true, but you're attributed with it. Nobody would even rent us an office in South Dallas. People here, black folks, didn't even understand a picket line. They'd walk right through it. There were white liberals, but they were so damn paternalistic you could not believe it. Now, I read that today because I was preparing for this for the first time, and that word paternalism struck me a lot, because I've had a lot of conversations in the last few weeks on this Confederate memorial issue where the word paternalism has certainly come up quite a bit, where we have a lot of the white leadership that look down and say, I know what's best for you, just sit down and be quiet, don't make noise, I'll do something to make you happy ostensibly, and it'll all be okay at the end of the day, just don't rock the boat. Hopefully we can read things like this and learn some lessons that maybe we should avoid those types of tactics, because in the long term, they're not very productive. And if we look back at that time, this is the late 60s, our schools were still not desegregated. W.T. White was the superintendent of DISD. We still had segregated white graduations and black graduations. And remember, when did Brown new Board of Education happen? 1954. So this is almost a good 15 years later, and we're still having segregated graduation ceremonies, which is almost, for a person of my age, unbelievable that would have happened 15 years after the Supreme Court ruling like that. But it did. The superintendent also encouraged a program of minimal standards. He didn't want to buy encyclopedias or reading materials, and he left that to parent groups. Now just look at DISD today, right? Look over in Lakewood, Woodrow Wilson High School, where we're actually doing a lot of really good things over there, but a lot of that progress is because of the parent groups that are investing their own money in the school system. And since Bill Betson's here, I'll make commentary on DISD, because we fight about it all the time, so he may disagree with me, I don't know. Usually he does. But I am convinced that the problem with public education, especially in Dallas, is that we don't make enough of an investment into our kids to get them where they need to go. And this is not just an issue of race, although it is, but it ties into the socioeconomic issues. If you look at the statistics on this, if you're poor, you are highly likely to grow up and continue to be poor into the next generation. If you are middle class and you are wealthy, you are highly likely to grow up and be middle class or wealthy. Now, if you look at this in the larger picture of history, we had slavery until the 1860s, not a lot of economic opportunity for black people to rise up to the middle class or the wealthy, right? And this is where a lot of white people today stop the clock and say, slavery's been over for 150 years, what the hell is your problem, why aren't you here? That's a bit short-sighted, I think. After the 1860s, we have another 100 years of Reconstruction, Jim Crow, white men actively keeping the black men and other minorities down. Again, not a whole lot of opportunity for economic advancement into this middle class and upper class, where then your kids can benefit from that statistically and also grow up to be middle class or upper class. People my age say the civil rights era was a long time ago, right? It was before I was born, for sure. Same argument again. Why the hell aren't you here? What's the problem? But racism in America didn't end in 1964. Right? It continued on. And to a large degree still does. It's not over yet. But we have to make these admissions to really understand why we are where we are. When I moved to Dallas in 1999, I remember we were hiring for a receptionist in the front lobby of a little oil and gas company that I'd gotten a job at. And a young black girl came in and applied for the job. And so I had been part of the crew that had interviewed her for this, and I think I was all 21 years old. And I went back and reported to my boss, seems qualified to me, I vote yes. And his response in 1999 was, we can't hire that black girl because I can't tell racist jokes in the office anymore if we do. So I have a hard time with this notion that white people and other minorities have the exact same economic opportunities to rise out of poverty and into the middle class and the upper class at the same rate. And so if we bring that back to public education now, there's a reason that statistically minority communities are more impoverished than the white community. And that right there is the reason. Minority kids that are poor, or it's not even minority kids, it's poor kids, even white poor kids, they start off in kindergarten with vocabularies of roughly 1,500 words. Middle class and upper class kids start kindergarten with vocabularies of roughly 6,000 words, 4 times. They know the letters, the numbers, the colors, they have soft discipline skills, all kinds of things that these impoverished kids don't have. We don't really spend any material amount of money to take the kid that starts here and the kid that starts here and remediate this kid just to get them to the same starting point. I was in Austin a couple years ago in front of the legislature trying to get Eric Johnson's bill passed for full day pre-K, and I was told by a Republican state representative when I'd made this argument that this was a parental responsibility, not the responsibility of the state. And until we get over that, we're not going to make a whole hell of a lot of progress. We've got to make investments in our kids so that we can get them up to this starting point. They start off behind. Dan, what is our reading rates for third graders? Is it still under 40%? By third grade, all our kids are still reading at grade level under 40%. That means 60+% of our third graders don't read at grade level. They get into middle school and high school, they can't read to learn the history, the math, the literature, the English, all of the other things. And I always ask my white students at SMU, when I tell this story, How many of you guys think you'd be sitting here at a graduate program at SMU if you graduated high school at 9th grade reading level? Was it really because you worked so damn hard to get here? Or did the system prop you up just a little bit? So we got to fix that system. That is still a problem that we're dealing with today in 2017. That's not history. That's right now. All right, sorry, I get off on tangents on education on occasion. I apologize. It's an issue near and dear to my heart, so I like to talk about it in hopes that some people will change their perspectives. But moving along. In the 1960s, more and more white people moved north. We had the whole white flight issue, right? After desegregation came down, everyone got scared. They couldn't have their kids going to school with minorities, and so they all moved to the suburbs into North Dallas, where that wouldn't be a problem. Around Fair Park, as the white people moved out, there still were black neighborhoods around Fair Park, and they were left there by themselves. Now, this is one of the more shocking things in our history, I think. In order to make sure that our guests to the Texas State Fair didn't have to see all the black people as they entered the gates into the fair, we eminent domained all their houses and turned them into parking lots. Now, Jim and I don't agree on everything, right? Sometimes we make some speculations as to motives. This one's pretty clear. This isn't really speculation as to why we did this and what our motivations were. There was actually an official memo in the city, and it actually said we can't have our fairgoers subjected to being exposed to a certain element. Every time I talk about that, especially with the younger people, they have that exact reaction, right? They gasp and say, holy shit, did that really happen? Yeah, that really happened. And we were so blatant about it, we put it in a public memo that you can still go find and read today. Right now in Uptown, drawing parallels to today, we're having a big discussion about crime in Uptown in a bar district at night. Anybody heard people say there's a certain element coming into Uptown that we really don't like? That's what I hear. I've been pretty active in that issue, and as I go through and talk to people in Uptown, that's what they tell me. The hip-hop music is too loud, and it's drawing a rough crowd. Are we still talking in code here? Yes.
No, same thing happened with the Jews moving out of South Dallas. They say it was Procter & Gamble and the smell of making the soap, but it was really blacks and poor whites moving closer to them.
So her comment is when the Jewish communities moved out of South Dallas, one of the excuses that they used was the smell of the soap from a Procter & Gamble factory. But I think we all know what the real reason was, right? I think enough time has passed we can be honest about that now. Anyway, in the summer of 1969, City Councilman George Allen, who was a black man that was placed on the City Council by the business elite. And keep in mind, in the 1960s, we had all at-large districts, right? So right now, for those of you that might not know, I always assume people know things, so just to be sure. Today, our city council is made up of 15 people. There are 14 districts and one at-large district, which is the mayor. All right, this was not always the case. In the 60s, I believe there were 9 seats, is that right? They were all at-large, which meant if you were a minority community and you made up 35% of the city of Dallas amongst all minorities, there was still 65% of the voting population that was white, and you were pretty much assured that all 9 of your city councilmen were going to be 9 white guys, which they were. I'm guessing that in the 60s they wanted to put a token up for something like that to try and show that they weren't as bad as they probably were. And so they put George Allen on their slate and moved him up into that. Now, he was tasked with going out to the people around Fair Park who were starting to protest and starting to take issue with being eminent domain in their neighborhoods. His comment on all these protests was the people there basically were not the homeowners involved, meaning the people at the protests. They were student nonviolent coordinating committees and black militants. The black people present were completely subdued by the rhetoric of these other people. Anybody heard that recently?
Always the outsiders.
That's right. It's never the people there, right? Yeah, it's always the outside agitators coming in and screwing things up, right? Rocking the boat. It's a problem. Now, I don't think this was in the book, but as I was doing a little bit of research on Reverend Johnson here, I watched a video that you had recorded, I think at UTD maybe, or SMU several years ago, and you told the story, and you can make corrections here later. One of the things he was charged to do when he came here was to raise money for a movie about Martin Luther King's life, and the idea was this was after the assassination, and the idea was to raise money to support Coretta and the kids. There was a lot of pushback in Dallas about showing this movie here, and if I recollect the story correctly, he was asked to a meeting at a church by some of our Dallas notables like H.L. Hunt and Ross Perot and some other folks, who brought him into a room and said, how much of a donation do we need to make to your organization for you to get the hell out of town? Is that roughly accurate?
Well, they brought the money in the suitcase with him.
He brought the money with him. Okay, all right. Is that like asking a cop if you can pay the ticket there at the window?
It was in the church that had to do with temptation. They showed it to me.
Well,
With a one-way ticket to the mountain, back home. Wow.
yeah. How serious are these guys about wanting the boat to stay steady, right? So they didn't want that. And maybe you can come up here later, Reverend, and tell the story about how the movie actually did end up getting played. I thought it was a really neat story about how Hollywood actually intervened and got that movie played here, but I'll let you tell that one. All right. Now, Reverend Johnson and a guy named Willie Bolden were pretty upset, as you might expect, with some of the Black Dallas leadership who were a part of this accommodation, who wanted things to stay steady. They didn't want the boat rock. They were getting what they needed out of this, and they didn't like these rabble-rousers coming into town. The environment wasn't really all that friendly back then. And even Texas Governor John Conley suggested that Martin Luther King had probably helped bring his own death upon himself. All right, this is the notion of white people who are in charge, looking at people that are fighting for equality and saying, you're really bothering me right now. And think about this for a second. I was talking to someone earlier today, and I said, you know, in my neighborhood, the streets are relatively okay. I got a grocery store right down the street I can go to. There's reasonably good schools around. I can afford to send my kids to a private school where I want. Life is good for me, right? I wake up every morning. I don't have a lot of stress. There's not a lot of worry because I'm not being oppressed. I'm just living my happy-go-lucky life. And you want to come to me and you want to bring me out of my ivory tower and tell me about the problems that you're having, and you want me to do something about it, which is stop oppressing you. Right? It sounds simple, right? But I think that makes a lot of people uncomfortable because they're happy to just keep going along because things are fine for me. Now, for the record, as Jim and I do have some disagreements on a few things, and one of them is the current state of the white leadership in Dallas. I will not go out of my way to defend them too heavily. But I do think that there is something about perspective here that we should consider when we're thinking about how we lead this city going forward. A lot of these guys are very well moneyed. They do big deals. They operate large businesses. And in my experience, at least today, certainly not in the past, but today, they, in a lot of cases, do have altruistic motives in a lot of these things. The problem is that they view the world at a very macro level, which is what they're used to doing. They're executives, they're CEOs. They look at companies from the top down. It's a macro view. What is good for the company as a whole? And the problem with that view of the world is that when you're only looking at the world from a macro perspective, you might neglect to consider the micro issues that are happening in this city that make up the collective Dallas as a whole. Now, it's reasonable to say we should look at both perspectives, right? We should take something of a macro view when we're looking at the future of the city. The problem is we can't do it to the exclusion of the micro issues. We can't ignore the communities throughout Dallas that make up our city. We've got to make sure that we're not doing this kind of stuff and saying, this is more important than you in your neighborhood because I don't have to live there and deal with it. Now, Mayor Johnson consistently refused to meet with these poor folks at Fair Park who are about to lose their homes. He didn't want to hear it. The macro view of this was that we needed to make a better state fair of Texas, right? That's what he thought. He neglected to consider the plight of the people that were actually about to be displaced, and he didn't want to hear about it. So this is brilliant, by the way. So Reverend Johnson sends him an invitation 48 hours before the first nationally televised Cotton Bowl football game. It was about to be aired nationally from Fair Park, obviously. Johnson informed the mayor that 600 marchers would stop the Cotton Bowl parade on national television on New Year's Day if, by then, the mayor had not conducted a meeting with the Fair Park homeowners to discuss their grievances. The mayor had until midnight of December 31st to meet with the homeowners. If no meeting had occurred by then, the homeowners would take a position on the parade route and occupy it until removed by force. Pretty smart, right? I mean, think about the whole reason that these guys were trying to keep the boat steady in the first place was they didn't want a Selma, Alabama. They didn't want a Little Rock, Arkansas. They didn't want this national attention. Right? Now, a nationally televised football game with a huge protest in front of the parade was the exact thing they did not want. So as you might expect, they got their meeting. Well played, sir. Despite the fact they got their meeting, little was done. They still lost all their homes. They did get a little bit more money out of them, but still lost their homes nonetheless. In a symbolic gesture, and maybe you can elaborate on this later, at the Cotton Bowl parade the next day, in a convertible, sat Mayor Eric Johnson and J.B. Jackson. So I don't know who Mr. Jackson is, but again, maybe you can elaborate on that a little bit later. Now, there is one passage from the book that I'm just going to read the whole paragraph in whole because I don't want to screw it up by paraphrasing it. Miss Higgins was an unlikely terrorist. Now, Miss Higgins, just to take a little step back, was one of the community leaders in Fair Park. She was also one of the first city council persons that was elected when we moved to single-member districts in, what was it, 1970-something. We moved to 8 and 3, so we had, what was it, 9 and 3?
90 as we went to 14.
Yeah, 90 was 14 and 1. I think it was 78
We started.
when we went. We went from having at-large districts. We went to 8 single-member districts throughout the city, and then 3 at-large positions. One of them being the mayor. So the idea there, obviously, is there's only so many parts of town that have African-American people living in them, so you can limit the number of black city council persons. And then as long as we've got enough at-large positions, we can maintain a white majority on the council. Right? In 1990, Judge Buckmeyer looked at this and he went through the entire history of at-large districts of 8 and 3, and then when we wanted to move to a 14 and 1, he noted that not one single black person had ever been elected in an at-large district, ever. One of the interesting comments, I made a note of this somewhere, there's a guy named Marvin Robinson in 1983. I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but it seems relevant. I'll come back to that paragraph. Marvin Robinson in 1983 was one of these African-American guys that really had the full package, right? Educated, successful, wealthy. And the white leadership, or actually the white leadership had made this claim that we have all these districts. If you had the right black guy, he could get elected. All right, the problem is you're putting up all these people that are unqualified and they're not convincing anybody that we should vote for them. So the black leadership pulls up Marvin Robinson, who, great resume, seems qualified based on my reading of him. They run in for one of these at-large seats. Estimated cost for a campaign in 1983, $200,000 to $250,000. They go around, they try and raise some money. At the end of the day, they raise $15,000 for this campaign. As you might imagine, he lost handily. I think it was 68% to 32% was the final vote in an at-large district. And this is one of the stories that Judge Bugmeyer pointed to in 1990 when we went to this 14-1 single-member district city council as an example that that assertion that if you put the right black guy up, he could win was just not true. And you weren't getting fair representation in city council for all these disparate groups. And so we moved to a 14-1. All right, but before that, back to 1978. We just moved to 8-3. Miss Higgins was one of 2 African-American city council persons that were elected under the 8-3 system. And here's the paragraph that I started to go off of. Miss Higgins was an unlikely terrorist. She used the mother word in a shouted exchange with then Mayor Wes Wise. I assume that was less acceptable back then. She talked back to new Mayor Robert Folsom. She told the mayor and the white members of the council that they were racist. She didn't laugh when they laughed. She never wanted them to like her. Mayor Folsom twisted and writhed in his seat when Higgins spoke to him. At every Wednesday council meeting, Higgins and Folsom reenacted this dance for the television cameras. And every Wednesday evening on the 6 o'clock news, it played to raves in the black community, earning Miss Higgins another heartfelt wave of uncritical devotion from her followers. Now, I have to admit, when I first moved to Dallas in 1999, I recall watching some of these exchanges on the news. This was obviously much later than this. And having a lot of reactions that were not uncritical devotion. Right, again, we're talking about this is racism back then. What's racism look like today? I came from Oklahoma, the reddest of the red states. And when I moved to Dallas, I was suddenly subjected to an entirely new environment of diversity that I was unaccustomed to. And as I watched these exchanges on the news at night with the black city council members and even in the county commissioner's court, my reaction was, again, not one of devotion. I kind of looked at that and went, why are you causing so much trouble? You're in a place of power, just do something with it. I didn't understand. 8 or 9 years ago, I got involved in DIST politics, along with a lot of the guys on the Citizens Council and with the wealthy white elite. And I was asked to chair a political action committee called Educate Dallas. And we went and we formed a board and we did our best to try and actually make this a diverse board that was from the entire community. And we did have some very interesting fights in our board meetings about perspective and what we should be doing and all the answers, and those were good things for me to hear. But we went on for this for years. And I recall thinking to myself as a very young lawyer trying to deal with some of these issues, why are these black people so pissed off? I just want to help. Right? All the guys I'm working with, they just want to help. And that's true, by the way. The motives were altruistic, but a little tone deaf at times. 4 years after that, I read this book in my garage on my little reading couch. And I remember reading this book, thinking back over the previous 4 years of my interactions in racial politics just in the last decade, and having a light bulb go off and say, I'm starting to get it now. I'm starting to see why these black people are so pissed off. And it wasn't an overnight complete metamorphosis or anything like that, but I think the importance of that is when we study this type of history and we look back on the things that people have had to deal with in our community, if nothing else, it should at least give us an opportunity to actually hear each other and what we're saying. We may not still agree, but I can tell you today, I'm a lot better at listening to another perspective and at least trying to figure out where you're coming from and why does this anger you so, as opposed to saying you're just bitching and moaning, stop it. Hopefully that will go viral. We'll see.
Oh, I got one. You said stop it.
Right. All right, in 1981, there was a guy named Comer Cottrell showed up in Dallas, and he was fast-tracked into the business elite. He was successful. He owned a very large business from California, and he did quite well in the elite community here. Jim notes that's for two reasons: because he had enough money and power to do some good for the city, and two, and this may be the more important one, because he had enough money and power to do some harm. It's really easy to overtake an adversary when they don't have the resources to fight you. When they do have the resources to fight you, you got to take this a little bit more seriously. Cottrell actually made a few comments that were aimed at the traditional black leadership. He argued that the white power structure had no respect for blacks because of the absence of a riot to pull the community together with a common interest. He thought that people who stood up and told off the white community, like Higgins from Parrot Park, were the catalyst for effective change. And I suppose there's probably something to that. If I'm sitting in my ivory tower and I tell you to go away and you do, I don't really have to think about it anymore or do anything about it, right? So the constant protest method is actually quite effective. Paula Walker, who was a black television executive, came to Dallas from Harlem. She recounted a story from her husband on an airplane. He said these two white guys from Dallas kept kidding the black man from Dallas about how much they could get for him if they sold him back into slavery.
You know what?
Auctioned him off when they got off the plane or something. And the black man kept laughing and going along.
Wow.
This isn't ancient history, guys. This was yesterday, right? Finally, when they started to descend, he walked up to them and he said to the white guys, "You're in the north now. You're not back in Dallas, so you need to cut that shit out right now. And if you don't want to get your asses kicked." And he turned to the black guy and said, "As for you, you really need to get your shit together in a hurry and don't let people talk to you that way. We keep our white boys better trained than that up here." Now, the point of the story is not just a funny anecdote. The point of the story is that when you push back against the power structure, you do get some respect. And it may not be the kind of respect you want, but it's at least some respect from fear or something else that we're going to have to deal with you, and that's how you get reaction. There's no doubt about that. In the 1980s, Reverend Johnson returned to Dallas. Another observation, after being gone for quite a while, that not a whole lot had changed. The quote here is, "There is no respect for the black community here because the black community has never given the power structure reason to respect it. When a community collectively has to confront its oppressor, the traditional things lose their meaning. Crisis creates a sense of peoplehood that didn't exist before. When they stop being Negroes and become black people, their eyes come up level and they look at the world differently. I have never seen that look in Dallas. To this day, I have not seen it." Again, I'll let you comment. This has been 30 plus years. I'd be curious to know if that has changed, but again, I'll let you talk about that. The Reverend Zan Holmes commented that Dallas, having not had a riot, had a negative side. A lot of emotion and anger that was present among oppressed people was frustrated and was never openly expressed. Black folks took their anger out on each other. In 1978 is when we had this 8-3 city council change. Remember, 8 single-member districts, 3 at-large districts. Miss Higgins was one of the 2 African Americans that was elected. There was a lot of pushback against that at the time. And the comments were, again, a little bit shocking if you think about it, and again, some parallels to today. Alex Bickley, who was part of the white power structure, fought long and hard against the creation of single-member districts because he believed they would ruin the DCC political machine, the Dallas Citizens Council. He called Higgins ineffective and a loser. Anybody heard that recently? I'm telling you, man, this stuff just doesn't change. It's just a cycle. George Schrader was the city manager of Dallas at the time. Schrader believed that the system will work against minorities, meaning this new 8-3 system, when the majority finally learns how to work the system. The minorities were better off, in his view, when the oligarchy was able to use the slate system to protect them. As my father used to say as a child, put that in your pipe and smoke it. Probably not good advice. Another interesting observation here that Jim made is, in looking closely at the black community, it's possible to fail to see that the white majority could be silenced by a sufficient show of authority. You don't have to sit down and shut up and try and get along and get what you want. There are other methods. And you remember last week we watched the video, Dallas at a Crossroads. Walter Cronkite was the narrator. The comment was, all it took was Walter Cronkite really wagging his finger and warning them that they would go to jail, be outcasts, and never see the Boy Scouts on parade again if they made trouble. And the entire white community willingly heeded the warning. Now, near the end of the book, we get to Jim's favorite part of the book, which is about John Wiley Price. And John Wiley Price moved to Dallas in 1970 as a teenager, 19 years old. In 1984, he was elected to the County Commissioner's Court, beating out Miss Higgins. I'd be interested to read a little bit more about that history and see how that went down. And then the book suddenly ends because it was published. And now we have another 30 years of history that we need to recount and talk about at some point. Now, before we go into the Q&A, I do want to see if Jim or Reverend Johnson has anything that they would like to share to talk about this book. Jim, do you want to go first?
Sure. Can I come up here?
Yeah, please come up here. So they all came to see you, Jim. I really.
I don't have a Mark Milton voice, so I gotta have this thing to reach you. It's funny, one of the things that we never talk about is how much the civil rights movement did for white people. Especially here. I remember when I came here in '78, I came to work for the Dallas Times-Herald as a City Hall reporter. I was covering and this was right after the 8-3 system had been instituted.
Here, step over here, Jim. Let the speakers sensitive.
Is this better?
I'll move over here.
Am I still, okay, is that good?
That'll be good.
Yeah, that's good.
Anyway, Dallas was getting to know single-member districts for the first time. There was a guy on the council, a smart guy, and he is still active in city politics now, these many years later, white guy. He's acted very successfully and prosperously in city politics. But anyway, I forget what the issue was. There was some fight at the council, and after they got up for a break, and he called me over into a corridor, and he said, "I know you're new here, and you probably don't understand what we're dealing with, but we have a new city council system here called single-member districts." And he said, "I am getting calls from these people in my district, and they're telling me that if I don't do what they want, they're going to vote me out." And he said, I have discussed it at length with the city attorney. And he said, he says they can do it. And I'm standing there waiting to see if this is a comedy routine. I couldn't understand what the hell he was talking about. And then I realized, later, it took me a while, it's the dawn of democracy. I have to say that my book was Peter Johnson's idea. He went to a young, bright editor named Bobby Frazee at Taylor Publishing and told him that Dallas was an anomalous city and that it needed to be explained and there needed to be a book about it. I was already talking to Bobby about a book in the same general area, so Peter winds up stuck with these two young white boys to tell his story. And he's always been incredibly gracious about it, even these many years later. But Peter Johnson, I hope this won't embarrass him. Peter carries internal injuries in his body that he suffered on the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma on that day that's in the movie. And he was at Dr. King's side through all the movement years. And he is the real deal. It's embarrassing to me to try to talk about Dallas's racial and civil rights past with Peter in the room. Peter, I wish somebody told me you were coming. I would have stayed home. But I wish that he would come up here and just explain. There's a phrase that he used in that quote that I had forgotten. He talks about when the eyes come up level. And he told me something once, it's not in the book, but he told me something about going into towns and cities in the South in the movement years. And he said we could tell immediately if it had happened. And by it, he meant this awakening, confrontation between white people and black people, where the white people had to, if you were the black guy, the white people had to look you in the eye. And that he said that when it hadn't happened, they wouldn't do it. It's weirdly psychological. But I've watched ever since I heard that story, and it's true, that people who haven't had this engagement with each other will look all over like they're looking for the bus or something, rather than look at each other and engage each other in the face. And he talked about how that had not happened in Dallas, and he thought somebody should explain why.
Jim Schutze is the living and walking evidence of why the pen is mightier than the sword. Not only has he had the audacity to be my friend over these last 30-some years, he's had the tenacity and the courage to call him like he see him. Dallas had two newspapers when I first came out. Dallas Morning News and the Dallas Times Herald. And we considered the Times Herald more liberal in the morning news. In fact, we call the Dallas Morning News the Dallas Morning Blues because it was such a right-wing paper at that time. Then this little Detroit white boy came down here with the Dallas Times Herald, and I started reading his opinions. And I said, well, it won't be long before they run his ass out of Dallas. Because that's what happened to journalists here who had the courage to call it like they see it. There are a couple of pieces of unique pieces of history I'd like to share with you all right quick. One, Mark talked about former city councilman, first African-American city councilman, George Allen. Tell you some unique history about my life in Councilman Allen. Councilman Allen was Andrew Young's uncle. Andrew Young was my boss at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. I reported to Andy Young. That was my immediate superior. George Allen was Andy's uncle. The white power structure here realized that George was Andy's uncle and Andy was my boss. So the idea was to put pressure on Councilman Allen. So Councilman Allen could get Andy to get control of me and to accept whatever contributions they were going to make to SCLC and bring me back to Atlanta. So Councilman Allen was caught in the middle of a fight that he could not win. There was no way he could please the white power structure because Andy had no control over me. You know, all Andy could do was fire me for being disobedient, and getting fired wouldn't be a new experience for me. With Andy Young as my immediate superior at SCLC, I got fired 3 or 4 times a year. So that wasn't nothing for me. And I have a friend who lives in there, Bill Harris. Bill is an 80-year-old, big, fat, bald-headed white man. He used to work in the White House with Lyndon Johnson when we was fighting for the right to vote. So he's somebody I've known for 1,000,000 years, and we're just like brothers. Bill asked Andy, he said, Andy, Peter tells me you used to fire him 3 or 4 times a year. And Andy said, he's a damn lie. I used to fire him 3 or 4 times a month. But it didn't do any good. I would go to Coretta and cry. And Mrs. King would call him and say, now, Andy, you know Peter is a baby. So she would make him hire me back. The decision to stay here in Dallas after my assignment was over. My assignment was, because April 4th, 1968, Martin King died. Dr. King had no insurance and no money. Nobody would sell life insurance to Martin Luther King. And any money Dr. King made or got, he gave it to the rights movement. If you all remember, Dr. King won the Nobel Peace Prize. And in the Nobel Peace Prize, they gave you a big old check. It was maybe like 300 grand, which was real money in 1968. Dr. King gave the money to SNCC and CORE and NAACP and SCLC. The next day, Coretta's car got repossessed publicly in front of church. Because Martin cared nothing about, he would always tell you, I'm not a capitalist. When he passed, the question was, what can we do to help Coretta and those 4 little bitty children? Harry Belafonte and Sidney Poitier and a Jewish producer from Hollywood named Samuel Livingston. We call him Sammy Boy. Sammy Belafonte and Sidney Poitier came to us in Atlanta and said, we have an idea to raise money to help Dr. King's widow. We want to put together a movie, a documentary on his life and experiences. And let's market it all over the world and set the money up in the trust for Coretta and Martin's babies. And because Samuel Livingston and Belafonte would say, we can't do it without the civil rights movement. If y'all agree to help us, we'll do it. So we voted obviously unanimously to do whatever we could do to help Dr. King's widow and his little children. The movie was entitled King, Montgomery to Memphis. If you haven't seen it, you can get it online, you can get it at the public library. It's a full-length documentary on Martin King's life, put together by Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, and Samuel Livingston. And we organized a strategic plan to market this movie all over the world. The movie was going to premiere in 800 cities around the world. That's how I got to Dallas. The staff under the directions at this time of Ralph Abernathy, was going to be dispersed throughout the world, wherever and we was going to organize the premiere showing of the movie. Now, I did not want to come to Dallas. I wanted to go to the islands in the Caribbean. But they made me come here, in spite of my objection to coming here. I did not want to come here because this is the only city that boycotted a speech by Martin King. I did not want to come to Texas because Texas was and still is the only southern state. There are no movement towns in the state of Texas. The only southern states from the Carolinas to Louisiana, I can tell you the movement towns in those states. There are no movement towns in the state of Texas. And there are a whole lot of historical reasons why. I had 5 states, I had the 5 southwestern states: Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, New Mexico, and Oklahoma. Those were my states. Dallas was going to be the base to develop the premiere showing, primarily because of Love Field, which was the best airport in the Southwest at that time. And I was going to be running all over the Southwest to organize the premiere showing. To make a long story short, 799 cities around the world welcomed the movie on Martin Luther King's life. There was only one city in the world who rejected showing the movie on Martin's life. Y'all live in that city. The only city in the world. Now, for me, I couldn't afford to be a failure nowhere where I was sent. Because of my youth, I was the youngest person. There was a lot of envy and jealousy on our staff, especially after Dr. King's death, because, which was true, the other men that was a little older than me, say Jesse and John Lewis Jr. and Eddie Osborne, all of them was 3 or 4 years older than me. And they would always say, well, y'all let Peter get away with stuff he shouldn't, which they did, because I was a kid and immature. And you shouldn't give him those kind of responsibilities. He's too kind of thinking, volatile is the word they would use, which was true. So the idea of coming here with this major responsibility, each area had a goal of a certain amount of dollars to raise to meet the international goal of this money from Mrs. King. She wanted to build a King Center, so we wanted to raise enough money for her to do these things, but enough money for her to raise and educate her children that we could put in a trust fund for Dr. King. So my failure here was personal for me. That meant I would have to go back to Atlanta and face the national staff that I could hear them now. Well, you know, Pete was too damn young and crazy to give him those kind of responsibilities. I had just turned 23 years old. So everybody else was older than me, much more mature than I was. And I did get away with stuff because of Mrs. King and Reverend Abernathy and Andy that nobody else could get away with. And they kind of let me have my way. One of the reasons is because I was a student at Southern University, which is the largest black school in the world. And a student leader, which means whenever they needed soldiers, all they had to do was give me the credit cards, I'm going to get them. I could go to Southern, and all of my homeboys didn't want to go to class in the first place. So to tell them, let's go to Selma, or let's go to Birmingham, so they knew that I had the capacity to bring 10, 15 cars of students anyway I needed to bring them. We could go to Mississippi. We could just tell me what y'all need, Dr. King, and I'm coming and I'm bringing the soldiers for you. And the good thing about being a student, nobody could fire me. They couldn't repossess my car. My mama gave it to me. I didn't have no job. They couldn't repossess my house. I lived with my parents, or I lived in a dormitory. So students was free to do things that my parents could not do. For me, I didn't give a damn. I'm mad the sheriff got with me, but what he was going to do? If he put me in jail, then all my friends going to come and got to fill up his jails. So I could handicap him and make him, well, I might have to rethink this jail thing because I only have 200 beds and they got 500 students ready to go to jail. You know, the math don't work. Dallas, Texas, I worked in every southern state in the civil rights movement. Every one. my worst experiences was here. The most arrogant, vicious, racist white power structure I faced was in this city. The threats on my life never ended. Once we pulled off the Cotton Bowl Parade confrontations, the FBI and the United States Justice Department came and told me, and it had already been to Dr. Abernathy and said, you got to get him out of Texas. Ralph Abernathy called me, and this is January the 1st. And a part of what we had done, the Cotton Bowl Parade had always been integrated. And a part of the deal was there must be black people in the Cotton Bowl Parade. That's why the parade was led by the mayor and Mr. J.B. Jackson, one of the black homeowners. Because what I had said to the mayor, if I look at this parade and don't see no black faces, we're going to still stop it. Although you did meet with the leadership from the homeowners. But January the 1st, Ralph Abernathy called me probably at about 4 o'clock in the morning. He said, get up, pack your stuff. You're going to a hotel in Shreveport. We're going to drive to Texas right away. The FBI is coming to get you. Because the threats was real. I had an apartment in South Dallas on Park Road. I had a roommate named Bill Stone. He's dead and a brilliant man. One of the greatest community organizers I ever worked with. About 5 o'clock that morning, they kicked my door into my apartment. Bill was a little bitty man, probably about 4 feet 8 at most. Drug him out of his bed, took him in the middle of the street on Park Road in his underwear and made him lay down face down with a gun to his head for him to tell them where I was. Nobody knew where I was. Because Ralph had told me, don't say nothing to nobody, get you a cab, go to the airport, there's a ticket waiting for you, go to Shreveport, Reverend so-and-so's going to pick you up and you're in a hotel in Shreveport, don't say anything to anybody. Bill did not know where I was. And nobody else did, but the cab driver who took him to the airport, his name, we call him Papa, he's dead now. He drove for the Black Cab Company. They didn't charge civil rights workers like myself money. So I could call them and say, I got to go do this, and they would come and get me. I decided to stay in Dallas because I was so angry with this city. Now we were able to, 3 days before the movie was going to premiere, we were able to get a version of the movie that was a promotional version that Sammy Boy and them had put together. Bring it to Dallas, show it to the white leaders at Park City Baptist Church, the rich white people. This meeting had been set up by a white man named Jack Lowe Sr. And when I went into this meeting that day, 3 days before the movie was going to premiere. And all of these rich white men. What I remember so much about this meeting, they had the whitest Christmas shirts I'd ever seen. And I wanted to know, where y'all buy your shirts? Because I love white shirts. Even today, I love them. This nice, crispy white shirts. This was Dallas's power structure. H.L. Honey and Tom Crow and all the rich, powerful white people here. This was like a 45-minute version of the movie on Martin's life. So the lights went out. One of my problems with that day is that I had a bodyguard who was armed named George Holland. And they didn't want the bodyguard to come into church with me. That meant I was going to be in this church with all these white people by myself. And I wasn't comfortable doing that. But this is for Dr. Key. So when the lights went out, I'm sitting up at the front seat. And I'm constantly looking back. And the movie's gone, but I'm looking at it. And then 45 minutes later, when the lights was turned back on, there wasn't a dry eye in that building. Martin had them all in tears. All these rich, powerful white men, literally in tears in this room. And of course, they decided to allow the movie on Martin's life to be shown. But we had only 3 days to put the tickets on sale, market it, advertise it. Just an impossible feat. But here again, God moves in mysterious ways. My office was on Forest Avenue, which is Martin Luther King. I would go back to my office, and I got a call from a Dallas cowboy who I'd known for many years, Frank Clark. Frank still living, I think. And Frank said, Peter, there were a number of cowboys here that I knew. Pettis Norman is one. Pettis and I have been friends since our college days. And Amos Marsh was here, and Amos I had known. And there were a lot of black athletes who would bring money to Dr. King. Cash money. So, and they didn't want people to know this. That's how screwed up America was. These were professional athletes who supported people like me, but they didn't want the cowboys to know they did. So Frank had called me and he said, Peter, don't leave. I got somebody I want to bring to your office, want to meet you. It's 8 o'clock at night now. So I stay in my office and my staff is there, my secretary, my bodyguard, and my staff people. So Frank comes with a white boy whose name was Peter McGuire. Peter McGuire came to my office with dark sun shoes, his collar open, his collar turned up and his shirt open, walking like he was black. Did not like that, was very offended by it, and let them know that I said, I will have these bodyguards throw you through one of these windows. And he, of course, Frank was saying, Peter, just listen to him. He got something he wanted to say to you. And once this man began to talk, tears started coming out of his eyes. And he said, I want to pay for tickets so everybody could go see the movie free. Now the movie was going to premiere in 3 or 4 movie houses. So the total amount was somewhere between $35,000 and $45,000. First, now this is 1969. First, I didn't believe nobody kept that kind of money in a checking account. Because you see, in 1969, 35 grand was real money. That was a lot of money in 1969. And you see, in my mind, and I called Frank to the side and said, Frank, let me tell you something. You need to get him out of my office because I don't have time to play with somebody. And I don't want his damn check because I know ain't nobody get that kind of money in no checking account. And Frank trying to settle me down. Peter, you need to listen to him. So I tell George Howell, I said, George, lock the doors, hold him here. We're going to call the public bank. If this check ain't no good, I want him to make us dough getting out of here. Make up a... So I called the bank. Somebody answered the phone for the public bank, and I tell him who I am, and I said, I got a check here. And he said, who? I said, somebody named Peter McGuire. I said, what do you want? I said, I need to know if this is a good check. So the public bank man says, yes, it's a good check. I says, but I haven't told you how much the check is. He said, doesn't matter if Peter McGuire gave you a check, it's a good check. I said, sir, you need to know how much this check is. He said, sir, I don't know you, but if Mr. McGuire gave you a check, that's a good check. So the movie was a big success because he also gave us enough money to buy radio time to tell everybody where you could go to the free movie on One's Life. Then he also paid for buses to bring low-income people from West Dallas and Southeast Dallas and downtown and the projects to see the movie. So the movie was a big success here because of Peter and Frank Clark and the fact that Park Cities Baptist Church in Jack Lowe set up that showing. But once that was over, I was so angry with this city that I wanted permission to, I'd say my deal was give me 6 months here and I'm going to teach Dallas a nonviolent lesson that they ain't going to never forget. And of course, Andrew Young said, well, no, your assignment is over. Get on the airplane, get back to Atlanta. You're going, I think I was going to Beaufort, South Carolina next. And I said, well, no, Andy, I'm going to stay here for a couple of months. Now, this kind of weird relationship that I had with Andrew and Reverend Abernathy, there was a black radio station here called WXO, I don't know, but it was the black radio station, and KNOK. So I was listening to KNOK the next day, and this news bulletin came on. Reverend Peter Johnson has been fired by Reverend Andrew Young. I heard it on the radio. But of course, Mrs. King, I went to Mrs. King and got to explain to her about the Fair Park homeowners, why these are people we ought to help these people. That the city of Dallas is walking in their face and taking these wasn't houses, these were homes that they was taking from these families. And I thought that we ought to stay that out. So Coretta goes there and they make saying they leave me alone in the army and tell me you can stay as long as you want to stay. And of course we immediately began to put our foot in Dallas's butt. As soon as I got real permission to stay here. But that's a unique part of our history.
Well, maybe I'll stand over here in front of you. Well, thank you both for coming out tonight. I think that was fantastic to actually hear it from you guys. They just tolerate me, but this was actually fantastic. I enjoyed it too. So, are there any comments or questions or anything before we get to our social hour?
No math questions.
No math. Yes, Larry.
I got a question for the gang, but I'd like you two guys to address the statues that the city's talking about. And by show of hands, first, is there anybody who doesn't want those statues to come down? Confederate statues. Okay. Is there anybody who wants them saved somewhere in a museum?
Yeah.
Really?
Well, you don't want to erase that history.
Okay, because I'm looking at the city of Dallas spending $1.8 million for 6 statues, and I think we could get volunteers to take them down in a weekend. Or we get offer people $5 for 5 whacks with any tool of your choice. We'll bring them down. But
Let them two
Well,
talk.
do you guys have a comment? I know Jim's written about it, but
yeah.
Well, first, they shouldn't have never gone up in the first place. They are the physical evidence of a disease in our society. But first, I don't think they should have ever gone up. They should have been down. Taking them down and destroying them is two different things. The artistic value of art, that it's art. So no, you don't want to destroy art, but I think that we ought to, trying to think how to put this way. In the civil rights movement, there was an ongoing debate between my generation and Dr. King's generation. Martin King's argument was that as we were fighting to change the laws, to get the color and white signs gone, and to change the laws where you could go to SMU. Dr. King's argument was that the laws are an external manifestation of an internal disease in the hearts of white America. Changing the laws is not going to change white America. Tearing down the statues, hiding them, is not going to change the other reality of bigotry and racism in our nation. We still have to come to grips with that and figure out what the hell we're going to do about it. And moving the statues, something we ought to do because they never should have gone up. But that's the peripheral of the issue of apartheid in America. That's not the issue.
And yet, if we beat up on the periphery, we'll eventually get to the center.
Yeah.
Won't we?
Yeah, we got to keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing. And now that one of the, I guess, worst things I've ever done in my life at the state, Martin King's church in Montgomery, Alabama is right down the street from the Alabama state capitol. That's the Avenue Baptist Church, where Martin first pastored, is right down the street from the door Georgia Wallace used to go in and out. At the Alabama State Capitol, there's a huge, very tall flagpole with the Confederate flag. I was going to steal it. No, we didn't. We had a plan. We had a plan. We was going to steal it. But some kind of way, Dr. Abernathy, Dr. King, found out that we was planning to steal it. And we had a plan. We was going to create a diversion. We was going to set the building on fire that the police department had officers in. So we knew we was going to do it. But they said, no, boy, y'all can't do that. And then to explain to us that the flag is only an external deal of a problem that's inside. Stealing that flag ain't gonna change Alabama. Yeah.
I've kind of waffled on it. I wrote something first saying they shouldn't come down, and then I wrote a second piece saying I misunderstood the moment and I changed my mind and they should come down. Years back before the Iron Curtain fell, for weird reasons that would take forever to explain, my wife and I found ourselves in Budapest in Hungary, and we were walking around, and we walked into this square, and all of a sudden here are these huge Soviet monumental statuary made out of poured concrete, with all soldiers pointing their guns at us. And I thought, wow, that stuff is really intimidating. I looked it up recently, and they didn't destroy it. They moved it to a museum area where you can go see it. I think the way it was displayed was absolutely it was weaponized art to scare people into obedience. And I think that the way the statues are displayed here is weaponized. And was meant to be when they were put up. And I don't believe they should be displayed the way they are. But I really cringe at busting them up. I think people need to be able to go look at them to understand the time and the moment and the mentality.
Thanks, guys. From my perspective as a younger guy, I could go either way. I think they should go down for sure. I don't care if we keep them or not. I think if you're going to keep them, how you display them matters. And so if you're going to keep them, then they need to be some kind of display to racism and not to Reconstruction.
That's right. Yep.
That's my thought. Yes, sir. I'll get to you next.
About the movie, were there any cities in Texas that showed the movie?
Very successful in Austin and Houston. Very successful. Very
Can't hear it.
successful.
So Dallas
That's
was the only city of Dallas in Texas that boycotted it. Okay.
No, the Dallas, not just in Texas, it's the only city in the world.
So we had Houston and Austin showed it, right?
Very successful. No problems at all in Houston and Austin. No problems at all.
Wow.
Welcome by the power structure, the leadership in the community, both white and black military leadership. The military has worked with me to get the movie shown in the Houston community. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Just a little different perspective on the statue. Growing up in Dallas, I was maybe 15, 14, 15. We had two parks. One was the Hispanic Park, Riverside, and then we had Lee Park. The pretty girls were over at Riverside. But my curiosity started drifting over to Lee Park because at that time there was a peace movement going on. So I never knew Lee Park as a Confederate. I don't even remember seeing that statue. I remember seeing dogs catching frisbee. That was the first time I really saw that. Or dogs in the air. There was more anti-Vietnam protests there, concerts in the park. I didn't see it as a racial thing. Other than I was Hispanic and I was with a bunch of white people. But they were great. It was just a great time for me growing up in that park. And I understand the sentiment now, but it didn't match back then because it just wasn't the focus.
A lot of weed.
Yeah. Again, my curiosity.
I think individual perspectives are important to hear, but at the end of the day, we're making this decision as a community and a collective. And the reason that those statues went up is the most important thing, because we are putting up a memorial to a thing. And whether everyone recognizes that or not, I don't think is necessarily relevant. And that statue went up at Lee Park in 1936, which was the year of the centennial, when we're bringing all of these people into our community to show off the city. And one thing that we put up in the city in 1936 to show off is a huge statue of Confederate general that really had little if no ties to our city. It's at the peak of white racism in Dallas. I don't think there's any question that this was an homage to racism in the South. And I people ask me this all the time, well, there's a slippery slope. Next you're going to tell me we got to go take down Washington Memorial and rename Washington, D.C. and all this kind of business. And my thought on this is that, again, the reasons we're memorializing people are what matters. We're memorializing Washington and Jefferson for contributions they made to our country in spite of their evil deeds, not because of them. And I think when we're talking about General Lee, we're memorializing him for his evil deeds, not in spite of him. And to me, that's an important distinction that needs to be made. Yes, Fred. Oh, hey, is that you, John?
Yes. I think I can do this from here. And I want to ask this question for all three of you. Two of the most famous code words in Dallas with regard to our city government should I say, ward politics. When we went to a single member system. So I'd like all of your perspectives on what that phrase means to you. And second of all, I'd like to ask the question, going forward, we have a 14-1 system right now, but the number of council members is not etched in stone. It's in the city charter, and as we all know, the charter can be changed. So going forward, how many council members do you think are necessary for the city council as a body to reflect the true population of this city?
Well, as the student moderator and youngest person on the stage, I'm going to elect to go last so that I don't say anything terribly stupid that they embarrass me for. But Jim, you want to start with this one?
A two-bit theory. I think ward politics means democracy, and it's used in a sneering way to deprecate democracy. I'm all for ward politics, but in answer your question about the number of council seats is interesting. When they were debating 14-1, Lee Simpson, who was active in politics and was on the council, later became an attorney for DISD, argued passionately that 14-1 was way too many council members, and that for democracy to be effective, you needed to have a maximum of 5. And his reason was that you needed great big districts where a council member can build up an organization, raise money, get out there and organize and build up a permanent political infrastructure within his district. When you bust it up and you have a lot of council members who are representing very poor districts, they themselves may not have much money, it's very hard for them to go out and raise money. It's way too easy for the Citizens Council to come in and put together 10 grand worth of checks, and they own that race. So I think you need to have fewer members and more organization.
There was a city councilman here named Jesse Price. When I first came to Dallas, I didn't understand that everybody was elected at large because each councilman represented a district. So I assumed that it was elected by districts. There was only one Negro and African American on the council because that was his Uncle George Allen. And my office is in my apartment was in South Dallas. The representative for South Dallas was a white man named Jesse Price. Because he represented that district, I thought he was elected from the district. I got pissed off at him because he couldn't pronounce the word Negro. He called it the Negro community. And I thought he should sue his university for his inability to pronounce a 5-letter word. But I also thought that I could use his overt racism to double the registration of Negroes in his district. So my strategy was, let's put together a recall petition for Jesse Price. Let's recall him, make his ass run again. Then if you win again, let's recall him again. And let's bankrupt him. Like we had done this in other parts of the South. I kind of knew how to do this with white politicians. Every time you win a race, baby, we're going to make him run again. You see. So I asked Judge Bedford, who's there, the lawyer, get me the law on how many signatures we're going to have to recall, to to have a recall election. So Judge Bedford says you can't do that. Like, hell yes we can. So he said, I'll get it for you. So he come back and he gave me this figure, and I'm looking at these numbers saying, don't have that many black people live in South Dallas. Because it was based on the whole city. Then he explained to me this, everybody elected at large. A handful of rich white people control this city called the Citizens Charter Association. And so now, I know the man personally who filed the first lawsuit against the large system in the city of Dallas. I know him personally. He's looking at it. That boy Ralph Abernathy to use that, he's volatile. He'll get pissed off and do stuff. If Jesse Price could pronounce the word Negro, we never would have gotten into this fight on the same
I'm really glad he's here. That's fantastic. All right, is that sufficient, John? Or?
Do you have anything to add?
Sure, I always have something to add. That's just the thing I do. For me, I think politics is about balance and finding balance. So when you talk about ward politics versus democracy, I can see both arguments. If you're on a city council that is making decisions as a group that impact the whole city, you have to give some thought to the other people you're impacting, but it's a two-way street, right? Other people should be giving thought to your district as well when they're voting for this city as a whole thing. So I really think if you're in a leadership position, you're still elected to represent your district, but you have to have this middle ground of both macro and micro level concerns. And I think part of the problem is some people have only micro level and some people have only macro level. And right now, that back and forth does help us find some balance, but if every person on the city council would try and find that balance personally, we'd probably be a better city. As far as 14-1, I don't have any issues with 14-1. I've never known anything different. There certainly are frustrations with having to deal with people that have different opinions. I have experienced this in DISD with Bill Betson. I'm just kidding, Bill. But in the city, that's always a frustration when you've got people that are from a different part of town that have completely different interests than you do, and you are forced into a situation where you have to deal with them. That's frustrating. So when I hear people say we need a 5-person city council, all you're doing is putting fewer people into the mix that you have to fight with to get what you want. And I don't see any way that 5 people would truly be representative of the diversity of the city of Dallas. So I think that's a horrible idea. And I think that our politicians just need to suck it up and figure out how to get along with 14 or 15 other people and start doing what's right for the city and not just what's right for their own political future. Mark Holland. And then Fred next.
We are here because of the work of Reverend Johnson and the authorship of Jim, who wrote this book. Will you briefly explain why people can't read this book and how they might be able to?
Why? I'm sorry, I didn't hear
that. That was a trick question, Jim.
Explain why. I didn't hear that.
So why we can't read the book and how can we read it?
You mean why I can't republish it, or?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not widely
Well, I have to start with my relationship with Commissioner Price. When I first came to Dallas in 1978, I came from Detroit. I went to a thing downtown the first night announcing some new building. It was all white except for the wait staff, who were all young black men. And somebody said something about my being from Detroit. And this guy in the group said, well, you must think you died and came to heaven because you've come to Dallas. And I said, it's a great city. It's going and blowing. It's exciting. It feels a little weird. And he asked me why. And I said, well, I just haven't been to anything social or business or political in ever that was all white. And so he launches into this speech about how our mispronounced Negroes in Dallas are happy and they like it here because blah blah, I don't even remember what, except it wasn't just mispronounced after a while. And he starts using the N-word. And I'm looking at this guy standing there with the tray, and I thought, holy shit, we're going to die. And I'm trying to signal to the guy in my own little chicken shit. Wait, you know, I'm not with him. But the black guy with the tray will not look at me. And it was my first introduction to the system. I mean, the black guy with the tray's attitude was, don't talk to me, hippie man. You stay on, there's a line in this city, and you stay on your side, and I stay on my side. And we're not buddies, and we ain't gonna be. And I just figured, oh, then my sister from Chicago came and visited and started giving me all this grief about how I must have moved back into a 1950s Colonel Sanders chicken ad. And I really did think I'd made a terrible mistake. And I'm driving down the street one day and I turned the radio on in the car. And the news announcer is saying, but one Negro person objects to this, whatever it was. And then I hear the voice of John Wiley Price for the first time. And he is just preaching. And he is saying, if you think this stuff is going to last in this city, you're crazy, because it's not. And this city, he said, this city is weird, and it's going to change now. And I'm going to make it change, and people I know are going to make it change anyway. I just thought it was like a ray of sunshine coming down. I thought, so there's somebody. So I haven't gone nuts or stepped into a dream or something. There's some reality here. And I called him up. We went to lunch, and we became good friends. And I had such admiration for him. You know, Peter will tell you, Commissioner Price, a lot of what he had to do in order to model and act out courage, he had to be extremely courageous himself and put himself in the line of real danger. And plus, he was so smart. So I just had great admiration for him, and we were pretty close for a long time. Then we got old, and things changed, and a lot of water went over the dam, and now we don't speak anymore. Before we stopped speaking, he kept telling me I needed to republish the book. And I kept saying, you know, you haven't read any of my other books, like Cauldron of Blood. Or, because I made my living for a while with true crime books. And I kind of know the book business a little. And I kept saying, there's no money in this book. It can't be republished. It's too expensive and it can't be sold. So he finally said, well, I'll republish it. And he was going to give the money to Kwanzaa Fest. And I said, do it. But in order for him to shop it around, I had to sign over the rights. He shopped it around, and he called me up a month later and said, Schutze, this book is a loser. I can't publish it. And I said, that's what I told you. But I never got the rights agreement back. And then stuff happened. Now we don't speak, and the rights belong to him. I have a feeling that Commissioner Price would have no problem with the book being republished, maybe on an online version, as long as it was free to people. He might even be enthusiastic about it. It's just if somebody proposes it to him, don't mention my name. Let it be his deal.
On that note, as I was walking around earlier, I kept seeing all these little white business cards all over the tables. And there is an internet address on here. It is not spam. I checked. It turns out it's an online version of the Accommodation. So I don't know who did that, but if you happen to pick one up, Just saying. All right, last question here, so we can stop this.
Well, we can maybe get one more. I'll cut mine short. I just want to say to everybody, with Peter, this is a great blessing for you to have Peter Johnson here. I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. So when I came down here, Dallas was weird to me as well. Because we had 2 riots in Cleveland, I'm glad to say. It was weird, but what it did was, it kind of cleans up the system a little bit in a strange kind of way, although certain parts of the city have not recovered from those particular riots. But it let white folks know that we weren't afraid of them. And I think that's the most important thing that we got to gather from this. Because when I came down here, I saw some fear, particularly from the brothers and sisters. And so that always was strange to me, because I didn't grow up in that kind of environment of fear of white folk. Because I was educated, I was trained, I understood that I stood on equal footing with you, and that the only way that we're going to make this happen is to be competitive. So I've always was into being competitive with you as well. But I just want to find out from Jim and from you, Peter, because I've known you for a while, where do we go from here with this particular discussion? And on a lighter note, I like Gunsmoke. Okay? So, there's some soldiers in the long range, and they're drinking. They get drunk. There's some couple of cowboys there, and the soldier says, "We're gonna drink to my major so-and-so with the army or the cavalry." These two cowboys say, "The only general I'm drinking to is General Robert E. Lee." And I'm thinking, whoa! Now this Gunsmoke took place in the 1870s. He said Robert E. Lee, which of course the cavalry didn't like that. So what happened? A fight starts. But who comes in to break up the fight? Festus. So Festus comes in to break up the fight. He's going off on it, blah, 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 blah. And all of a sudden, he says, "So what's going on?" So the cavalry sergeant says, "This man said he only drinks to Robert E. Lee. He called Robert E. Lee a name." Well, Festus looked at him kind of crazy. Now, you done went too far now. So all this just brought back this thought process that white folk have been revering Robert E. Lee for a very, very long time. Although the statue needs to go. It's been up and it hasn't changed anything. Removing it might bring some changes that can be a start. That's all I got to say.
Thank you. Do you have one comment over here?
Yeah, I was gonna. My name is Daniel Clayton. I was gonna say something very similar as you did. So, to Reverend Johnson, to Jim, as of right now, where are the problems with organizing, and where are the bright spots with organizing?
You did. You did.
Who are you?
I'll just sit down.
I thought we wasn't going to have no hard questions. I want to first say hello to Ken Carter. Ken Carter.
Hey, Ken.
It's my brother, my friend. And Ken went to one of the great universities. Where you go to school? Don't you know?
Yeah, GSU.
Now look out, now Ken got grandma, and I swear that school up there in North Louisiana, you know, we'd go up there and give them a good whip and then take all the pretty girls. We'd have got you. Let me say a couple of things. First is that in terms of electing your own people to represent you, it's not that real relevant what color they are if they're going to represent you in your community. The fight for the right to vote left a lot of my friends in the graveyard. So the vote is sacred to some of us because we buried our friends. When we filed the first lawsuit against the Allied system based on the Voting Rights Act, and we wrote the Voting Rights Act with our feet. And it took 20-some years to win this fight. The whatever deals that was made with the Negro community here. Those deals was made because I had been reassigned back to Atlanta. When Jesse Jackson resigned from SCLC, I had to go back to Atlanta to help Reverend Abernathy. So there's no way in the world we would have made those kind of deals with this city. That would have never happened if we would have still been involved in that. Those lawsuits became for this community, for the local leaders in this community. For me personally, I felt that we should have never allowed local black leaders in this community to make those kind of decisions, because you can't trust black leaders in this part of the country. Ralph Abernathy felt that we ought to let local people make their own local decisions. I disagreed with Dr. Abernathy. Now, I look at the quality and the caliber of black elected officials. And sometimes I think my friends died for nothing because of the people that we elect. But as a people, we're new to this. Hopefully we'll get better as the years unfold. But right now I'm very disappointed with, especially in this part of the country, with black elected officials in this part of the country. They don't have an agenda for our community. Their agendas for themselves. And that's all of them, from county commissioners to local city council people. They have an agenda for themselves, not for our community. You know.
The big divide that I see in the city more and more isn't even it's almost not liberal conservative, and I'm not going to trivialize black, white, or Hispanic, white, or any of that stuff, but there's a huge divide between young and old. And young people just have such a different worldview because they're so much more tolerant. They can resolve a lot of nuts and bolts problems. I think, Mark, how old are you? 39? I think it's really important to start electing people 38 and younger. A little joke. But it's really true that, man, it's amazing to me how much just gets going and happening when younger people get into office.
Let's give you guys one more round of applause before we close it up. Thank you guys for coming out. That was fantastic. I appreciate it. All right, one note before you wander off to the bar, and we still all hang out and still shoot the shit over here for a while. Next Tuesday, we're starting a new book. So next Tuesday, we're going to start White Metropolis, which I found recently for $8. So if you guys want to come back, we'll publish that online. Hopefully, we'll see you next Tuesday for the next book series. Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a picture. I'm going to take a picture and I'm going to tell you how to send it to my email. So I have a wall in my office.
Everything you said about education, I agree with. So